All right, keep him coming.
Wow, it's wonderful.
Literally coast to coast.
Across the nation.
I'm here in Philadelphia tonight, my hometown. I saw Allentown.
I'm zooming in from Maryland, and I see there are some Marylanders here. Hi,
Yeah.
Laurel.
Yeah.
Some neighbors.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Please join us. We are excited to have a rich and fruitful discussion this evening. I'm particularly excited if you, like me, have had a chance to see some of our guest work. I'm sure you are joyful and looking forward to learning and hearing more from her today. All right. Keep them coming. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just taking time to give everyone a chance to come on in. All right. Coast to coast, Connecticut to California, and then some, all in between. We welcome you into this space. At INELDA, we like to create this environment that's an environment of not only learning, but also growth and understanding. And we're excited to have you joining us tonight. Some of you are members of INELDA, some of you are guests who have joined us, especially for this program this evening, and we welcome all of you. We welcome all of you. Christina, is that most folks? Should we go ahead and begin?
I think we should begin.
Right. Thank you so much. So my name is Nzinga El-Mekki Abdullah-Aziz. I am an educator here with INELDA, and I'm also a registered nurse that's certified in hospice and palliative care, and I work in hospice right now. And it is truly my honor and my pleasure to be with you this evening and to be moderating this discussion and this webinar, and really looking forward to, as I shared, a very rich and fruitful discussion. As you're entering, please, for those of you who might still be coming in, go ahead and let us know where you're from in the chat. We've got a great evening planned. We have some polls, we have a presentation by our guest, and then we'll have time for questions and answers towards the end of the program. Thank you so much for being here. So let me go ahead and get started. Zeynep is going to share with us for about 20, 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have the Q&A. But let me introduce our guest. Zeynep, welcome to this INELDA webinar. Thank you so much for being here with us and for being willing to give us your time and energy, your wisdom and your knowledge, and kind of bring us into this fold of the research that you've done and just the strength and power that you have when you present, and you're sharing really not just from your heart but also from your soul when you let us know and you let us into this perspective. And I really benefited and appreciated that so much, and I'm excited to have our guests come along on this journey with us. So Dr. Zeyneb Sayilgan is the Muslim scholar at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, Maryland. Her experience of being born and raised in Germany as the daughter of Muslim immigrants from Turkey informs her work on Christian-Muslim relations. She is also the host of a podcast named On Being Muslim. Zeynep, if you're ready, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to you to begin our presentation. Please go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Nzinga, for this generous introduction and for allowing me to be here tonight and share a little bit of my own journey and my own interest in this work. And I'm so grateful to INELDA, to Lauren and the whole team at INELDA for inviting me to this space. I have so much admiration for all of you for the work that you're doing. And I think for me, it's really sacred work. The work that you are doing, it is so necessary. And I think end-of-life doulas do it in such an incredible way to help people to reflect more on human mortality. I mean, this is something that is an aspect of our human existence, but somehow in our culture, in this current society, we are not well equipped. We are not prepared to face our mortality. We don't talk about it. We don't engage conversations about half of the human experience, which involves pain, loss, suffering, sorrow, sadness. And while there is nothing wrong about the pursuit of happiness, there's no conversation about the fact, I mean, if you ask a room like I often do, who has it all? Who has it all? Who has not experienced sadness in their life, or loss and sadness and sorrow? And all, everybody in the room will say, yes, I have experienced sadness. I have experienced pain. I have experienced illness. I have experienced sorrow and shed tears. But it's what we call this toxic positivity, or this culture that doesn't allow for any conversation to enter. And maybe because part of it is because we have a fear of death. There is death anxiety, which is absolutely natural, and I'll speak more about that. But this is the reason why I so admire the work you're doing. And I think that the work you're doing needs to be even broader outside society. I'm sure you get a lot of questions when you say, I'm an end-of-life doula, or I provide end-of-life care. And then people probably curious like me, what's that about? And I think those are wonderful ways already doing something that the Islamic tradition is so passionate about in bringing death remembrance to the front and center of human life. So I want to talk a little bit about the Islamic theology of death and dying, and then also offer some practical advice and tips that I thought when I, spent time in the hospital setting, but also as a grieving mother, that I think are hopefully useful in your own work. And I didn't mention that, but I come, like I'm sure many of you, to this work from a very personal experience. Almost 2 years ago, my daughter was killed in an accident by a truck driver. She was 3 years old. It happened 10 days before her 4th birthday. And since then, as a Muslim theologian, I've always engaged with my tradition. And the tradition always, talks about human mortality and death and the afterlife and what's the nature of this life. But ever since my daughter died, it's became a huge opening for me. And it just showed me how much more important this work is, reflecting together on human mortality, or what's the meaning of this life? Why am I here? It's very existential questions. What's the nature of this life? And why are we suffering as human beings? And why can't we have it all on this planet? So I think the death of my daughter, I always consider her to be my spiritual guide. I think when a loved one dies, they also become, in a way, it reconfigures the relationship. They become, for me, she became a spiritual guide, opening important avenues to reflect deeper on mortality, on death and dying, and the purpose of this life, and how to help people, face their own grief and support them in their own grief journey. So this is how I came to this work. And since then, all my thinking and writing and research has been centered around the very important topic of death and dying. And I realized that the more we courageously and bravely face the conversation around mortality, we are better off. And I want to situate that. Why is the Islamic tradition so keen in trying to encourage people to talk more about mortality and remember death frequently, which was the case until the modern time. In the medieval times, there was a very strong practice of memento mori, and the Islamic tradition has sustained that. But like I said, in the modern time, we fall into forgetfulness. Life is busy. We don't really make time to be introspective and reflect on our own finitude. But when it comes to the Islamic theology of death and dying, in Islam, death remembrance is front and center. It's part of the spiritual DNA of a believer, so to speak. And, this is already a very countercultural thing to do, because if you go into a doctor's office and you fill out the form and get the question asked, how often do you think about death? And if you maybe think too often about death, then that's not necessarily a good thing, right? That raises concerns. But as a Muslim and from an Islamic perspective, the remembrance of death and the remembrance of our mortality should people bring into a more life-affirming position, that they really understand that life is such a precious trust, and increase their mindfulness, their full presence, and the quality and depth of their lifestyle. So as I remember my own mortality quite often now, I reconsider my priorities. I think, I don't know how long I live, so how do I want to invest my life on this earth? How do I want to invest my energy, my time, my feelings, my emotions, my intellectual gifts and talents? And this is what the Islamic tradition aims for when it talks about death all the time. That you are a traveler in this earth, you are a guest in this divine guest house, and you have a very limited time on this earth, so make it count. So it's not this idea of remembering death and escaping life or denying life, or have an attitude that is completely otherworldly, but quite the contrary. Human mortality or death remembrance should ideally increase the quality of our lives, increase the quality of our relationships, make us care for more sacred causes, for very important visions and ideals in our life, and then that pushes people, or should ideally motivate us to reconsider our lifestyle and think, I'm investing so much time in this particular issue or this particular. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth my energy, my time? This relationship, is this something that helps me to spiritually develop and nourish myself? Or, this relationship, is it something that is life-giving and life-affirming? Or is it something that is maybe harmful for me? So these are the questions that I think the Islamic tradition wants the person to ask by pushing them towards death remembrance. So death remembrance, like I said, if you go to visit mosque, and you will see that is often a very strong element in the preaching. You look at the authoritative sources like the Quran, the Holy Scripture, and the prophetic teachings, and you will always see that death is often mentioned in the tradition. So I want to state that, because what is the theology of death? Death is not seen as an end of everything. Death is a transition. Death is considered as a bridge to the other world. So a very strong belief and affirmation into the afterlife. Majority of Muslims affirm a conviction into the afterlife. So death is situated in that regard as a gateway to that eternal home. A return. Death is seen as a return to that celestial home and to the Creator. And human beings are seen as guests and travelers in this divine guest house, really here for a very short moment of time, and then returning back to the heavenly origin. And so this is important to keep in mind as we approach Muslims. Death is not seen as a separate power or as intrinsically evil, regardless the circumstances. Even in my own case, the death of my daughter, it's a very tragic circumstance. But as a Muslim, I strongly affirm that this incident is still situated in the larger divine framework of God's cosmic planning. I don't see it outside of it. Death is not something that just is a random event or a random occurrence or an accident, or that is somehow outside the divine framework. And Muslims will typically say that after somebody dies, they will say, we belong to God and to Him is our return. Indeed, we all belong to God and to Him we will return. And the we is very important affirmation that this is a collective journey. It also takes away the sense of that death only happens to me. It doesn't happen only to me. You know, I look into my neighborhood, you know, in 80 years, everybody will be leaving, max, right? So this is a fact. This is an undeniable reality. But there is also comfort in that acknowledgement that we all are on this universal journey. And by acknowledging that this is a collective journey, a collective experience, it takes also away this idea that death is an isolated case or an isolated experience. But sadly, especially in our modern time, I think it is treated as such. It feels as if death only happens to a selected few and the rest is somehow immune. That is a delusion, the Quran says, which is the holy scripture of Muslims. The Quran, the holy scripture of Muslims, every page you turn talks about death as a return to the all-merciful Creator. So while death should never be glorified, suffering should not be asked, death should not be desired. That's also something, a prohibition in the tradition. We want to have an attitude where the person is fully invested in life, but at the same time understands that they are not ultimately, the eternal life is not granted in this world. I mean, that they are, here, that they are transitory being and then they will return to their Creator. So that's a very, very strong Muslim belief. And I'm a community leader. I live in Maryland in a very diverse community. And I have heard this echoed in all the Muslims who visited me. And this is very important. Why am I saying this? This is not something that you will see that this is a very shared orientation. That death, even though it's painful, even though we experience sadness about that separation, even though my heart is aching for my daughter and I have this holy yearning, I still affirm that I will join her and that all of us will ultimately experience, death. And this is what the Quran tells Muslims, that every soul will taste death. There is no escape. There's no denying. There's also no negotiating. You know, every time I go to the graveyard, I see young people, I see older people, I see rich, I see poor, I see educated, uneducated. Death is the equalizer, tells the Quran. And this is why it's so fundamentally important in the Islamic tradition to include funeral visits or funeral attendance and visits of cemeteries into the spiritual practice of the Muslim. That's a very strong recommendation, and typically funerals are very public affair. Everybody comes and attends, and the goal of it is to understand that this is a collective experience. It's a communal experience, and to be in a place of productive discomfort. Islam wants people to be a little bit discomforted by the fact that everything they cherish and love and they are attached to ultimately cannot accompany them. This is a painful reality, but something that Muslims want to face bravely and with courage. So to talk a little bit more about Islamic theology of death and dying, like I said, Islam doesn't consider God so Islam is a monotheistic religion and affirming the oneness of God, which means God is not compartmentalized. God is not just the God of good things and the rosy times and the sunshine and what we call the solar spirituality, that God, the God in Islam is not the God of a prosperity gospel where he shows up when you're healthy and happy and prosperous. He is also the one, as we read in the Quran, who challenges the human being with sad experiences, with painful experiences. And so we see that what I call this a God of the lunar spirituality. You need both elements for the human being to thrive. A human being cannot live a full human life if they not experience pain, loss, or suffering. That doesn't transform them deeply. So the Islamic tradition is concerned to encourage people to uh, not see illness, death, separation, sadness as experiences that need to be shunned or blocked or to be resisted. But there is beauty in them in terms of their spiritual their ability to spiritually transform us and to change us and elevate us. And I can speak to that personally. I did not ask for the death of my child or for this incredible tragedy and suffering, but the teachings and the wisdom and the depth of insight that I have received through the death of my daughter were transformative. And when the heart is open to that, there is opportunity for growth, even in the darkness, even in the night, even in the cold. Even in that lunar spirituality realm, there is opportunity for growth and closeness and intimacy with the divine. And this is important to mention because death is not seen as an enemy in the Islamic tradition. Death is not something that you need to conquer. You should not glorify death. You should not desire death, but death is also very important part of the divine plan. And this is something that creates a lot of, I think, that's where it gets challenging, I think, for the human being. to how can a God who's so loving and so merciful allow for death to occur, right? For separation and sadness to be experienced. But as painful that experience is, it's still part of the divine plan. And for Muslims, the journey of this life or the place of this earth is a place of transformation and spiritual development and change and elevation. So when death occurs, it's not, like I said, if, for example, in a hospital setting or medical setting, you have to, it's a sacred obligation as a Muslim to seek medical treatment. Absolutely, yes. You can't, it's an obligation, a religious obligation to do everything you can to preserve that life that God has given you. But in the case, if all medical circumstances are exhausted, death is also not resisted. It's still seen as something that is an element in part of the divine wisdom. I hope I'm making sense. So it's this middle way that Islam strives to bring people into, not desiring death, not glorifying death, but also trying to allow for the remembrance of death and not to resist it if it happens, and to allow the fullness of the human experience. And that's why the tradition wants followers of the Islamic faith to be in spaces where it's uncomfortable, where in spaces where there is opportunity for lunar spirituality, the moon, right? So, for example, there are a lot of traditions or sayings, statements of the Prophet Muhammad to be with those who are sick, to visit the sick, that this is a sacred act of worship, that this is a holy act, that there's closeness to be found when you are walking with somebody who is in pain, because that person who is vulnerable and is in pain or who is dying this person has something to teach you, teaches you, gives you wisdom about the fragility of life, teaching you how to detach yourself from things that might maybe not be worthy of being too attached, teaches you about, humility. There's so many lessons to be found. So death is therefore not a private affair or individual affair. Muslims are encouraged to visit the dying, to be in the presence of the dying, to take care of the dying, to be in the closeness of those who suffer and are in pain, and not to avoid that. Sadly, I read about stories where people are so uncomfortable, they cannot even be in the presence of those who suffer and are in pain. They avoid them, they shun them. I've heard stories about mothers, grieving mothers, when they are spotted in the supermarket, people change their way. I mean, this is so disappointing, right? I mean, so we want people to be comfortable, the caregiver and the care receiver, to be comfortable in the discomfort. Like as a grieving mother and as a scholar, it was very important to me in my very first weeks of intense grief that people are allowed to see me. I wanted them to be in my presence and see and witness how it feels to be vulnerable, to be overwhelmed, to be grief-stricken. That was a very conscious decision because I thought people are so, we don't have many opportunities for people to witness somebody else's vulnerability and to learn from that emotional moment, I think. And it's not that the person just receives the support, but as you are walking with a person who is dying or you're caring for them or to them, you're also receiving something. It's this mutual transformation that is occurring, which I found so beautiful. And this is what Islam aims for. As we are caring for one another, we are mutually transformed. We are equally changed. We are both receiving, and we are both growing spiritually, intellectually, and morally. So I found that very beautiful to witness and to experience. And this is where I come, where I think I feel like as a public educator that I want to help people to be more comfortable in the discomfort and think about their mortality like you, and to start these conversations early in the families. I think that's part of the problem why death is so painful. I mean, it will always be painful. There is no guidebook or learning or to navigate that. But I feel when those conversations about human mortality happen early in families and in communities, it kind of it's a more integrated experience, and it also allows for a little bit more emotional and mental preparation. For example, in my family, death was something that we talked before death occurred, right? I mean, you have a flower on the table, a flower bouquet, and you say, death is part of life. Look, the flower bouquet is decaying. It has done its service to the world. It leaves eternal images and imprints, but now it's leaving, right? This is the cycle, and so death is an intrinsic element of life. Now we are in the winter season. The Quran says that winter is a symbolic event for death, and that human beings should remember their own death as they are witnessing the death in the creation, and how then the Creator will resurrect the earth back after its death. And so there are many verses like that that allow us then to reflect on the creation, on death in the creation, and then also take it back to our own death remembrance. So these are some basic theological ideas when we think about death in Islam, that it's part of a larger divine framework. And I think this is important as we approach, Muslim clients and patients, to understand that death is not a punishment. Death is not, a sentence into non-existence. It's not annihilation. It's not nothingness. It's not meaninglessness. So these are very important. And these are important teachings that soothe the heart, that comfort the believer, that bring hope and instill hope and instill life and light. I found them personally very life-giving, and these are the truth that I hold on to, and these are the things that keep me hopeful every day, and they build resilience. And I think that is something that religion and spirituality provides to people, that strengthening that inner spiritual core, right? So Islam is about prevention also. So when we introduce death remembrance early into the conversation in communities, in our families, that then is more of seen as more of a natural part of life, instead of seeing as a very unusual and abnormal event, right? And it doesn't feel as intense. So I think there's some preventive work that we can do, each of us, expanding the conversation on death remembrance, on mortality. I think it's happening. I see much more conversation. And also making it, this is probably the harder part, how can we make it a more of a collective experience where people don't grieve in isolation and feel like that's their private thing and they can't necessarily share. Yeah, so I can speak more about the theology part, and we'll share some notes with you after, and you can always go back. But in terms of some practical tips, I think, for end-of-life care for Muslims, as a patient and as somebody who is visiting Muslim patients in the community, number one thing, Quran is always seen for Muslims is it's a source of healing, right? If you come into a room and the person asks for a Quran recitation, there are apps, there are on the internet websites where you can simply pull up a Quran recitation and let them listen. And there are studies that show what a profound impact these Quranic words and Quranic recitation, how comforting it is for the person who is dying or who is receiving care. Because Muslims believe in the healing power of the Quran, and the sounds and the words of the Quran feel incredibly healing, and it's believed also to have a healing function. Now, how do we find out if somebody is Muslim? I mean, I was thinking, you don't go into the room and what are some cues? You try to listen, right? I mean, this is very important, strategic listening, trying to get some cues, but also maybe having something in advance, a form or something which can be filled out by the family, and asking them if they have spiritual needs, religious needs, if religion is important to them, if spirituality is important to them. Or if you feel like, right, you have the intuition, if you can ask how you can support them. I think what we want to get at is to provide care that matches the values and beliefs of the person. That is, I think, regardless of who is in the room, so important. I'll give you an example. I had a Muslim woman who came to a physical therapist after an accident, and the PT asked her, "What's your goal? What does success look like for you?" And she said, 5 times prayer is so important to me. I really want to be able to pray again 5 times. That means standing, bowing down, prostrating. Can you help me to get there? And that was amazing. I think this is a wonderful example in stressing the autonomy of the person, saying, what is it that you want? How can I support you in your journey? And what does it mean for you? What does success mean to you in this moment? How can I be really there for you? And I think this is a beautiful example that I often share, because it was important to her, regardless if I think 5 times prayer is not important or what's the big deal. It is something that sustains her spirituality. It is something that nourishes her, keeps her core strong, gives her a holy connection to the divine, right? So if we can support And there are many people in the hospital who'd like to pray. They might be bedridden, and can we help them to take their ablution? Can we maybe move their beds into the direction of the Qibla, the prayer direction? Is that something that they want? Are they concerned about their modesty? Because as a Muslim woman and Muslim man dress modestly in public. And when you are a patient, you feel extremely vulnerable. You know, your sense of personhood is shaken. Your autonomy is taken. You feel like you have no decision process. And if somebody asks, can I get a scarf for you? Can I get some extra cover for you, an extra blanket for you? These are huge things somebody can do, right? Never underestimate those things. And just to stay with that, so modesty is something that a lot of Muslims value. And so being covered in public, it's like, you know, a certain dress code when you go into public still holds true when you are in the hospital setting. You want to be covered. You don't want to be exposed unnecessarily. And if this is something where we can support the client or the patient, that will be awesome, right? And there are also gender dynamics. I know, you know, in the Muslim tradition, you know, the gender, men and women avoid physical touch because they have a respect of the intimate sphere of a person, their personal autonomy, right? This body is sacred, and physical touches are important. And so to ask the person for permission, if it's, of course, a medical emergency, then we have this wonderful rule. Medical emergency breaks all the rules because saving the life is utmost priority. But if there is a situation where the woman might be not comfortable with a male provider, or can she have maybe a chaperone in the room? Can she have a female nurse in the room, right? So these are things that we can ask for. If, for example, I had a male chaplain visiting me, um, and he asked me if I would be comfortable with a Christian chaplain. I mean, so in this case, scenario, it was the religion that was the issue. Can I even serve you because I'm not Muslim? And I said, please, you know, my husband was in the room. I said, can you please say prayers, whatever you can offer? I would love to hear your prayers. But that's not always, it might not be the case or the comfort level of everyone. So to ask them, I think it's always great to communicate, to say, I come from a Christian background. This is something that I would love to offer if you are willing to receive. If not, I try my best to find someone else from your tradition. But just communicating that, I think, incredibly helpful. And some might be willing to receive, some might not be comfortable. So again, I can't speak for everyone. But in my case, I felt it was beautiful to have somebody in the room to say prayers for me, my daughter, my family. So you have everything you need, you know. I think as a believer, I know that the human being is endowed with this incredible potential of compassion and love, and just following your intuition. And there's so many things, you know, healing touches, like just holding someone's hand and you know, giving them a gentle healing massage sometimes. So with healing oils, these things are wonderful things, and there is touch is just amazingly powerful. I remember this woman coming into the room. I shared that earlier with Nzinga. She was a case manager from the insurance. I don't remember her face. I don't remember her name. But she said, I looked into your folder. I read your folder, and can I just hug you? Can I just hug you? In that moment, I just broke out into tears. I was so incredibly grateful that just someone was there to embrace me, you know, that warmth, that human care and love and compassion. So we might not be experts of every tradition. We also cannot be, but we all are equipped with compassion and care, and we can express it. And that expression is healing in itself. Communication, right? Strategic listening, uh, giving people back their autonomy as much as we can. Those are wonderful ways we can always support people from all walks of life and all faith. Um, and just showing up, being in the presence. I always call it the ministry of presence. I know you already are experts, but people are always so fixated on the right things to say and the right things to do, but just saying, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say, I just want to be here in your presence. I mean, those things uh, are just wonderful gestures of healing, of love. And I can't think, and I think that's the beauty of the human being, that we all can do that, but we are so, I think we are so focused on perfectionism. But if the person in front of us, they sense our sincerity and our authenticity, and to show up with vulnerability and say, I really don't know how to help, but I want to be here and I want to listen. And just please let me know how I can be the best support to you. I think those are the things that I found very helpful. Ministry of presence, showing up, um, that human presence is so important. People, sadly, they are so anxious that they're going to say the wrong things, and then they opt up for uh, not being present, which I think makes it even more painful. So I'll stop here, but maybe you have questions, and then we can. I want to keep it conversational.
Well, Zainab, thank you so, so much. That was very powerful. Thank you. I need a minute.
You're very
There's
welcome.
so many words that you said, strategic listening. There's so many words that you said that really cut to the core of what's important. And this idea of being a ministry of presence is really at the heart of the doulist work. Well, while I get myself together and collect my thoughts, we did have a poll that I had promised. I had hoped to do it earlier, and in my eagerness to get started, I did not. But let's go ahead.
I think it was a happy accident. I'm gonna pop in, and while you are ruminating over, and I guess not ruminating, I just love that word, but I think while you are digesting all of the wonderful things that our guest has shared, I will go ahead and launch our 3 poll questions, and they're gonna come one at a time for you. So let me go ahead and launch our first poll question here. And you'll see it on your screen. Poll question number 1, I am here today because, and you have 3 options there, and you can choose any of those 3. First option, I want to know more about Islam. I work in an end-of-life environment, and I want to know best practices to support Muslims at end of life. And you can choose 1, 2, or 3 of those options. We'll give you a couple more seconds for everyone to find that poll and answer that question. And right now we've got about 85% participation. Just a few more seconds here, and then we'll end this first question. Couple more seconds. And looks like we've got everyone who's going to participate. So let's end this first question and I'll show you all the results. With 92 participation, it looks like most of our guests on this webinar want to know best practices to support Muslims at end of life.
Yeah. So why don't we stay with that a little bit more? Because as I'm speaking, I actually had all my notes jotted down, but it was a little bit chaotic day. But hopefully I will sit down and put those notes together in writing, and I hope to share that with you so you have something that you can always use as a reference. But in terms of end of life practices, like I said, in the process of dying, the Quran scripture is incredibly important for Muslims. So I can't stress it enough. If the person desires to listen to the Quran, if you can make Quran recitations, apps you can download on your phone and make them available, that will be great. The other thing is, like I said, the end of dying process is a very collective, it's a very public affair. So there might be sometimes policies in various institutions, regulations that might be challenging because Muslims are encouraged to be in the presence of the dying, and the person who is dying also wants to maybe reconcile, seek forgiveness. Well, so those are very important sacred moments. And could we maybe be a person who negotiates some of this? Because I'm from Germany, and I realize, that we have these policies, or even here, like especially during COVID, it was very difficult to have visitors, right? Especially if you have like a whole crowd. When I was in the hospital, my daughter died. My friends, incredibly helpful. I'm so blessed with this amazing community. And the nurses would say, you have so many visitors. How are we going to, coordinate that? So they came up with this system, with this, Excel sheet where people just put in their time slots and when they wanted to visit. And I had 2 visitors every day. And so we were able to manage that and so forth. But sometimes, frankly, I also said, I'm just tired. I'm just exhausted. I need a break. And that's okay. To be able to be an advocate for the person who is on the deathbed and saying, is this okay for you? Like, how can I support you? Can I, I think there are challenges sometimes there because the hospital staff might not understand those religious and cultural dynamics. I think this is something to watch out for. And maybe already as a team, like I said, Islam is about prevention. Could we have resources and plans in place that prevent conflicts in the first place? So first of all, this is great. This is education. We become literate about these practices and some of the desires that Muslims have when they are facing death. They might want to have visitors because this is a very important sacred passage in their life. And the community wants to visit, and we don't want to end up having an overwhelming crowd. So can we, as of, those of us who provide care and support the circle of care, can we negotiate? Can we somehow help navigate these dynamics? So that's something to keep an eye, because I've heard complaints, just complaints, but also sometimes just because of lack of understanding. Why do we have like a group of visitors, right? It's because this time of the dying person is incredibly important for the community, for the family, but also for the person. The other thing, if we, let's say we have the person who's dying, right, or who faces death, has died, the body is considered sacred, and funeral services should be taken place fast. So can we help in processing the death certificate more quickly? It's very rare. It's actually very common that Muslims are buried the next day. I have an app, every week we are 70 women who do the ritual body washing. Every day, there is an announcement, this woman has died, and then next day the funeral happens. So it's a very quick process, but we also don't want to rush the process, because sometimes I feel like, bidding farewell, seeing the deceased person, those are very important stages also in the grieving process, and they have their place in the tradition too. And I think this is something that I'm trying to educate my own community, my own circle, is yes, the tradition says that the spirit, the soul desires to be buried quickly, and we should ideally prepare funeral service quickly, which means the death certificate and everything, the papers have to be prepared quickly. But we also want to make sure that the family and the loved ones have time to integrate the loss into their grief, right? So seeing the person, for me, it was very important that I wanted to see my daughter, because this was too gigantic to comprehend. I had to touch her body. And even I've done a little bit of reading, even in secular institutions, families are now called to see the deceased body, so that it helps in integrating the loss. Because imagine you've been spending all your hours with this person, and all of a sudden this person is gone. And how are you able to integrate that loss? I mean, so realizing this person has left this world, their soul has departed, the body is not moving. And by touching and also the family members preparing the body for the funeral, it helps in processing the loss, I felt personally. And so trying to help the family in that process, the circle of care, if there's something we could do in supporting them in that regard, I think that's very helpful, because sometimes we also don't want to rush the process too quickly. I've heard mothers, grieving mothers, say to me after, I wanted to see my child, but everything was too quick and I didn't have a chance. And that creates even more pain, exacerbates the grief. So those are things we don't want people to have, fall into the stage of regret and remorse. It just makes everything more painful. So like I said, you will not find in Muslim countries or Muslim communities a crematory. Like cremation is prohibited in Islam. It's a very important fact. The body is sacred and has to stay intact even for the funeral. Why? Because the body is the vessel through which the human being experiences the world and the qualities of the divine, right? We are hungry, we eat, we experience God's quality of being the provider and sustainer and the nourisher. Those are aspects that the body experiences. And the body is therefore not just, an empty vessel, but considered sacred and therefore needs to remain intact. And cremation is something that I have not heard or seen in the Muslim community or in Muslim countries, right? So typically what happens is a natural burial, and the mosque communities make sure that there are funds available, ideally, if somebody cannot pay. I mean, sadly, in Muslim country, in Turkey, for example, the municipality, the government covers all the costs. Death is not commercialized. It's not nobody makes profit out of death. But here, even it's expensive to bury your loved one. I mean, sadly, it has become commercialized. So people are faced with these choices, So in the Muslim communities, I know several cases where the community steps up and tries to, cover the costs of the funeral, because this is a communal obligation. Every human being has a right for a dignified burial, a proper burial. And it's a collective obligation that the community has to make sure that these rights are met. And this is taken very seriously. The same goes for the body washing. I wrote a piece about the sacred body washing. The ritual has to be done by volunteers, by the community or the family members of the same gender. Modesty rules still apply. The body is not uncovered. The people who are preparing, washing the body, they have to lower the gaze, never look at the person in a manner that is inappropriate. So it's a very and part of this group. I'm very blessed to be part of this women's group of volunteers who does that every week. It's a very humbling act to be in the presence of the deceased person. They have so much to teach you. They have so much to tell you. It's just, there's so many emotions, right? It's horrifying at the same time. You like, this is going to be me. I don't know when, right? And you face I mean, you remember death often, but there's something about volunteering, and being involved in the sacred body ritual, washing, that is profoundly humbling and transformative. And that's why we have in our group 77 women who show up within 5 minutes. They are there, they have lives, they have jobs, but they come and they do it because they believe this is a very sacred act, and they want to honor the fellow sister, fellow believer. So that's something that is also not outsourced in the community. And it's also not allowed to take money for that, right? It's not commercialized. It's a voluntary act, which is highly rewarded in the Islamic tradition. And then the funeral services take place. Like I said, it's a communal event. The announcement is made to the entire community, and the entire community should make an effort to attend. It's also, I think, beautiful. The last time I went, I saw kids from the summer camp praying in front of me for the deceased person. I was like, oh, wow, children are here, women, men. I mean, it was a regular, in the middle of the day, summer day. And there we were offering funeral prayers for the person, right? I mean, I love how Islam tries to integrate the experience of death into the natural daily rhythm of life. It's not something that happens on the weekend or we have to make time or schedule, but this is something we have to, it's built into the rhythm, right? And the end of life practices, what are some other things that we can? So I talked about the death certificate, the paperwork, which it can be puzzling because non-Muslims always say, yeah.
Before you continue along this vein, let's go ahead and go through our next two poll questions and slowly transition because we've got some questions coming in.
Okay.
So hold your thought, if you will, please, and pardon my interruption. Christina, can you go ahead with the next two poll questions? We'll just run them sequentially and then go ahead and get in some of the questions, and probably what you want to share can be included in that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nzinga. Okay, so the next poll question is a really quick one. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. How often have you provided end-of-life care to Muslim patients in your practice? This is a single answer question with the first option being never, occasionally meaning 1 to 5 patients, sometimes 6 to 10 patients, frequently, which would be 11 to 20 patients, and very frequently being 21 plus patients. This again is a single answer question, and we'll give you maybe another 10 seconds to answer this. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Looks like the majority of us have never had a Muslim patient in our practice. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, share those results. And again, once again, you have the majority being never. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this last question. Go ahead and launch that. And the question reads, what do you believe are the biggest barriers for Muslim patients accessing end-of-life care? This again is a single choice question: lack of cultural competence, financial constraints, language barriers, religious beliefs, or other. And then you can specify in the chat if you believe it's other. Okay. Just a few more seconds on this one, since you do have to read through and think about this one. Okay, let's go ahead and end this poll. And the results are, as you can see, the vast majority are lack of cultural competence, which I believe you were addressing, Zeynep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we all need more education. I think the world becomes more diverse. Even I mean, I think that's why, you know, as a public educator, there are so many misunderstandings. I think when we think of Muslims and their relationship to death, the things that we see in the media, the negative stereotypes, there's this false notion that somehow Muslims glorify death and they can't wait to get into the afterlife and you know, and be martyred and get into heaven, and that they, you know, despise this life. This is just not true. I think you know, we have to be mindful that these are very negative constructions about a very large Muslim community. And that's real. I mean, it's something that sadly is around. So I hope I was trying to present you with this idea that human mortality is a universal experience, and how does the Islamic tradition navigates and addresses this reality. And the world is getting increasingly diverse. You might not be today, but studies show, surveys show that Muslims are a growing population. And there might be, you will find yourself maybe in situations or places where you will, have these cases, and you have to have a little bit of basic literacy. I think is always helpful. I always say, as global citizens of this planet, we all need some basic religious and cultural literacy and competency. I think it's just a requirement of a good, educated global citizen. So, yeah, cultural humility. I love that. And like I said, I think one recommendation that I have, I always think of how do we prevent things before they happen. So making sure to build relationships. I mean, you have people like Nzinga. I mean, this is great. INELDA already is a platform where you can come together as a community and build connections, have resources. Even at your institutions locally, are there 2, 3 people you can build relationships from different religious traditions, from different cultural traditions, have these connections already in place? Because tomorrow, or even when you are at a hospital or institution, are the nurses, doctors that you feel like are coming from that religious background or cultural background that you can consult as a resource. Trying to already build a network, I think, have those relationships and resources, build these relationships first, is such a great help in your work. And to understand, we cannot do it in isolation. We need collaboration. We need the support and solidarity of one another. We can't know it all. We might be presented with a case that I wouldn't know as a Muslim what to do, and then I go ask, right? So I always see it, can we build those networks, those relationships early on, that when we are presented with cases, that we already have resources in place. It could be the Muslim chaplain, it could be the Muslim doctor in the hospital, the nurse. INELDA can maybe have more of this kind of interreligious community building, whatever it is. I mean, you can. I think what's important to have something locally. Are there ways where I can build connections with some local religious communities? Some of my mosques just started an open house, meet your Muslim neighbor. I mean, who are we? I mean, you just, one example I give, a Muslim friend of mine, she just went to the church next door and said, hey, I'm your neighbor. I want to just get to know you. Who are you? Right? So I think those are the things like productive discomfort. We all are in our comfort bubbles, but it takes a step and courage to knock on each other's door. But you know what? There is beauty to be found in coming out of your little comfort zone and being transformed through the knowledge and wisdom of the other person. I found that's why I love this work and love being in interreligious spaces. I found it. I love my peers. I love my Muslim community, but I also think it's boring to always be just in one corner. I want to widen my horizon and learn from others, and our lives are interwoven. So make sure, I think, to have that kind of support system already in place. Are there 2, 3 people you can think of that you can use as a reference and as a support in your work? The other thing, somebody asked about presence, how to cultivate presence. I think just to I personally, I encourage myself, motivate, try to be in spaces where the other half of the human experiences. I mean, we celebrate birthdays, graduations, promotions, weddings, but where's the other half, where we experience loss, illness, pain, sadness, isolation, loneliness? Can we walk with others, and are we making an intention to be in those spaces? Because this is the other half of the human experience. And those are things that, how can we cultivate that? Being intentionally more present. And we can do that in our lives by introducing children early on also. I think, I take my daughter to the funeral services, or I visit with her the neighbor who is sick. I want her to see that this is a reality of our human journey. And it's part of our experience, and not something that we need to block out, or I need to shelter her or something. So I think this is where I think to cultivate presence, and I pass that on to other parent friends and my community members to say, make an effort to cultivate that presence. Go with your children as a family, and see that other half of that human experience, right? Walking with them, to a hospital and all of that. Yeah.
Those are some great, excuse me, those are some great suggestions on cultivating presence. We have a few questions that were also coming in. Zeynep, you were getting ahead of us, catching questions as they were coming in. And I know Christina was also tracking. Christina, are there some questions that we can go ahead and pose to our speaker now?
There are. I have 7 questions, and before I ask the first one, I'm going to also introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Christina Montgomery. I am the EA for this call, so I help with all the tech stuff, the Zoom operations. I'm also an INELDA trained doula. And outside of INELDA, I am an ordained minister in the evangelical. I'm not going to come off my mini square, Lauren. I'm not. I'm also ordained in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, where I serve as racial justice manager in the office of our presiding bishop. And I wanted to introduce myself because the very first question we have ties in my own religious and spiritual beliefs. And it is a request to have your daughter's name. And part of my spiritual practice is whenever the name of a deceased loved one is named, I like to light a candle and invite their spirit into the space. And so I would like to do that if you honor us with the name of your daughter. But I don't want to do that if that is not also part of your spiritual practice or would not honor your spirituality. So the question is, if it is by an anonymous participant, if it is okay with you, what is your daughter's name? And my personal request would also be to light a candle for the remainder of our time together to invite her spirit into our space.
Ah, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Of course, it would be an honor, and there's no more beautiful way to honor her memory than being in this beautiful sacred presence. I think for me, that's her legacy now. That's her legacy. Like I said, she's been my spiritual guide, and I named her after Saint Mary. She was, I prayed that her name was Maryam, which is the Arabic name for Mary. And for me, that name was a prayer that I hoped that she would be as devout, as pious, as pure. And she was. It's God's great work that He, in this tiny little human being, can do amazing work. And the things that Maryam teaches me every day about life, I will be forever grateful. So thank you for remembering her name. The anniversary of her death is coming up, and I know we all yearn and miss our loved ones. And I pray and I hope that God reunites us with them. That love still sustains me, keeps me strong. And Maryam is always remembered. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for, like I said, what you're doing is sacred work. The world needs it so much. Every day I feel like it's a big opening now. After she died, I felt, why didn't I see that before? Yes. And I feel I need to work harder and better, because there are so many people who need the support. They need our help, and the sacred work you're doing is just amazing. I'm so grateful to each of you, and for your incredible willingness to listen and learn. You are ambassadors of this sacred work, and thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be in your presence, and Miriam is too, I'm sure. She
Yes.
loved people. It was in this very room. She was sitting on my lap while I was teaching my last class before she died.
She's with us. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you,
that with us.
beautiful people. Thank you. You made me all cry.
We do a lot of that in our gap.
It feels therapeutic. Thank you. Bye.
Space. And one of the things that I wanna remind everyone about the beautiful work, the course that Zeynep created following her own experiences, Muslim Perspectives on Death and Dying. And when she opens up that course in the very first class that dives into more of the theological foundations, Zeynep shares about how her daughter's love sustains her. And this is something powerful that we can all relate to for people that are souls that are departed from this physical earth, but their love and their connection to us still sustains us. And this is something also that as we're working with our patients and clients, for those who are doulas, you can really bring that spirit and that understanding into the work that you're doing, and you're connecting and bonding with the patient and the client there. But understanding that as you're helping them and showing up in that ministry of presence, you're allowing their family to see them, to be comforted by the example that you're setting, and ultimately they'll be able to remember them. These experiences that you're having create a space where everyone is better in the long run. Unfortunately, death is not something that we're able to negotiate. It is definitely a part of our lives. One of the other things that Zeynep shared was about and I'm quoting you, Zeynep, the constant heartache and sweet longing that lingers and that stays with a person when someone that they have cared for is no longer there.
Always, always. And that is, I think that you come to accept that there is beauty in walking with that heartache and heartbreak. It's a beautiful opening for holy insights. And it's painful, yes. It never goes away, but there is beautiful insights to be found. And it's scary, but there's also so much incredible beauty. And we have the sacred connection with Nzinga. Her beautiful son died, Muhammad Jawad, and I always remember him now with his name. And he has become your opening to the after. And I'm always amazed how we decide if out of death, if we create an afterlife. But we give meaning to the death of our loved ones. We decide if we want their death to have meaning. And in terms of presence, I think, yes, while I am a grieving mother and will always be, and this has become core of my identity, I never, when I'm in the presence of other grieving parents, I do not share my grief immediately. I don't make it an occasion for me to process my grief. It's about them. And I know we all agree, because sometimes there is maybe, I know from visitors who came that there's so much unprocessed grief that people carry with themselves. And when they have this opportunity to be in the presence of someone, again, this is not malicious intent, but then they try to get the focus on their grief, right? Because there's still so much unresolved. And this is not something where we want to be. We want to be present for them. It's about them and their pain and their grief. And it's not for me, while this grief has certainly brought me there in a way, it's not about me in that moment. It's not about me. So I step away. I don't share that until maybe at a later point, if the person asks if they want me to share, I'm willing to share, but I don't make it an occasion to impose my grief on them, or my to now be in the spotlight somehow, right? I've seen that sometimes, and this is not something that people, like I said, that there is a bad intention, but it's just because people carry so much unresolved grief and pain. They feel like, now I have a space, I can talk about this too. And
Yeah.
so to be careful in that regard, how do we make sure our presence does not dominate, or our grief does not dominate the other person's grief? You know what I'm saying? So um,
this is one of the things that is part of the INELDA training, and one of the things that's so important about what the training brings forward in reminding all of us that we're not going to fix it, right? As doulas, we show up to be, as you said, the ministry of presence. We're not there to repair it. We're not there to fix it. We're not there to carry out any practice of erasing or eliminating or removing, but we're there to sit with and to be with and to share in that space and the communal and collective experience of recognizing what is happening. Zeyneb, you honored me so much by remembering my son. So I shared that with Zeyneb, and being a grieving mother, and that being part of the core of my identity, and also that introduced me into this world of end-of-life care, and ultimately really guided my career and my practice in so many ways. Um, one of the things that you mentioned, Zeyneb, is about how when is about how the insurance, the person from the insurance company came into your room.
right.
Had an experience where a grief counselor entered my room and sat there. I don't remember her name, I don't remember her face, but she sat with me. And in that way, I just wanted to remind everyone how there are doulas everywhere. This work is a body of work that many people do, sometimes unintentionally. And one of the number one concerns that was expressed was, how do they show up and be there for a patient or a client who has Muslim beliefs? And this power of being present. So you have an advantage. For those who have experienced the INELDA doula training, you have an advantage over anyone. And showing up as that human being, as your full human self, willing to be vulnerable and open, and to kind of help that create that container to hold the grief, to hold the experience, is one of the most powerful things that you can do. Christina, do we have another question from our audience that we can move to?
We do, and I was going to try to combine two of them
All right, let's try.
that I think might be similar. I'm going to read the first one from Sandy Chambers. I have gone to the funeral services of patients to whom I was especially close. I am Christian and don't know Islam prayers or worship practices. Would it be acceptable for me to attend a funeral service of an Islam patient? And then the other one that I felt was similar um, is this one. It's from an anonymous participant. Do you agree that overall the Muslim community would prefer a Muslim death doula, or do you believe people are open to seeking assistance from death outside the Islamic religion and Muslim community? Those
Hmm.
felt similar to me.
I mean, to the first question, when I attend funeral services, this past year, I've seen non-Muslim guests attending, coming to the mosque. There was a particular tragic case, actually, 12-year-old boy who drowned. And I went because I just wanted to be with the mom. And I saw the whole class was there, this whole school, the teachers, the neighbors. It was beautiful. And one lady actually approached me and said, "Are you a family member?" I said, "No, I just want to be here. I'm a community member. I'm a fellow human being, like." And there is something, so non-Muslims are absolutely welcomed into those Muslim spaces. Some mosques try to, prepare the guests and, guide them around. In my case, they were able to, like, here are chairs if you want to sit, if you don't feel comfortable participating in the prayer ritual, you can just observe. But absolutely, Muslims are the most welcoming people. I don't think I will see, hospitality is so big in our Muslim community, and they would love to see you, right? And who would turn away a guest? I think there are some dress norms, codes. I mean, you like long loose clothes when you enter the mosque, which is also, often common in some Orthodox churches. But that shouldn't prevent you. I think people will be so grateful to see you. It's a beautiful moment to make connections. So I think yes, and absolutely. If you try to want to experience this and try to get in touch with some local Muslim communities, I think it will be amazing. It's also we need to dialogue more with one another. We need to build bridges of understanding, and these are occasions for us. So often we just live side by side, not knowing who we are. And I think those moments are incredible connections. I found, especially moments of death and grief, have been amazing openings for deep connections for me with my neighbors, non-Muslims. So absolutely, thank you for suggesting that. The other thing about Muslim doulas, I mean, we all feel probably more comfortable if somebody gets us, our religious backgrounds and our cultural backgrounds. But it's really, I can't speak for all Muslims. I don't know. I put it back to you, Nzinga, how you feel in your work. But I mean, it depends. I mean, it's really depends on the Muslim person and what they are seeking. If they are comfortable with you, if they have better chemistry with you, then the Muslim person, like sometimes that's also the case, right? I I might have a chaplain that I have more chemistry with than the Muslim chaplain. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's a human thing, right? So I think that a good match, I wouldn't say yes or no. So kind of undecided. I can't speak like clear cut on this issue. What's your take on this, Nzinga?
I agree with you. My thought is that it's really going to depend, for a very scientific answer. If the person is looking for a doula to a person who's a really great listener, a person who is a deep empathizer, a person who, to use Zeynep's beautiful language, is a strategic listener, who can really be there in that way. That can be working on a legacy project that's bringing that skill set of being a doula to that practice. I can imagine that that's going to be your strength. The thing that I also would imagine is if that person is looking to get more of a spiritual experience with the doula, in that they want to have Quran read to them in Arabic, or do certain prayers or with them, or with assistance from them, some things where it would require that a person have a deeper knowledge of Islam specifically, or be a practitioner of the Islamic faith, then I can see in those spaces where they would prefer possibly to have a Muslim doula. In the way that I show up in the world, as a nurse, I've certainly taken care of many people who are Christian, many
Right.
people who may have been Buddhist, even Baha'i or practicing Jews. And the care that I'm giving them is not, it doesn't interfere in any way with their religious practice. And the way that I try to show up for them in all of my human fullness and as a full-on caregiver, it doesn't interfere or take away the fact that I'm not the same faith as they are. So I hope that in some realm that parallels in the doula world as well. Do we have some more questions, Christina?
We do. Following up on that one, I'm gonna do this one. Muslims are not a cultural or even religious monolithic entity. How do we best ascertain that we are also culturally appropriate, not just religiously? And that comes from Sylvia Klosser.
Yeah, wonderful question. Yes, absolutely. Muslims today, there are almost 2 billion Muslims coming from all cultural, ethnic, racial contexts. And However, when it comes to the death rituals and the death practices, I would say that there is still a very strong shared orientation. And like I said, I grew up in a very diverse, I'm sure Philly, same, very diverse community here with Muslims from all walks of life. It's a very diverse, culturally diverse religious community. You have, Black Muslims, you have South Asian Muslims, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. We have every Wednesday a women's spiritual gathering, and it's mixed. I make it an intention that I love to have a diverse Muslim community. I don't want to be just in my own Turkish or Kurdish cultural bubble, which is beautiful. But when we talk about death and dying and these rituals, there is a very strong shared orientation. So if there are cultural elements, sure, but there might be, right? Then I think the best is to, again, communication. If there's something that the family or the person thinks is important to them, that needs to be communicated. I mean, we are talking about this, again, very, very big community, and there might be cases where you need to be flexible in that regard, and we are adaptable people, and we can see where the person is coming from, what is important to them. But also, I think sometimes when I hear, and I even I had this one woman who said to me, "Oh, my mother died. I feel like this is a punishment." As a Muslim, I was able to challenge that thinking a little bit. I didn't want her to be in this space of having some destructive thoughts or thinking for her that she is somehow abandoned or not loved, or because there is nothing in the Islamic theology that supports such thinking. So as a Muslim and as a scholar, I put that hat on and I said, my dear sister, we need to rethink what you think, because these thoughts, they are not healthy, and they are not useful in this moment. So I think we can also tap into these resources. When I present you with the theology and some of these elements, the thinking and beliefs, I know we want to be respectful, but there's sometimes, if we feel that someone is stuck in a certain thought process that doesn't seem healthy and supportive, we can also say, I've heard this Muslim scholar saying that Islam, death doesn't consider, is not considered as a punishment. It's not something that is, intrinsically evil. So I want to, also make us comfortable to use this knowledge when we have cases where we feel there's some destructive thought pattern at play, and we want to really strengthen the person and get them away from this victim mentality a little bit. I'm not sure if that's already too much interference as a doula, but I feel like as a scholar and somebody who, alhamdulillah, I mean, I lean into that leadership and I own it, and I think I have an obligation to correct such thinking, because it's not present. I mean, we embrace and follow the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, who has lost 6 children of his own. He has buried his own 6 children. His own mother died before, when he was 6. His father died before he was born. His companions and friends were murdered and massacred. I mean, why am I saying this? I mean, this is a prophet, the messenger for Muslims, the mouthpiece of God, very important source of normative living, who has experienced incredible suffering, yet he does not name death as punishment. He does not regard himself as being somehow abandoned by God, or less than human. Now, these stories, and I've written about this, the Grieving Prophet, the essay that I've written, I hope we can share that with you, is to soothe the Muslims in the community who are dealing with immense grief, especially in this time of collective trauma and suffering and grief. We go back to that early memory. I mean, it's very strong in our memory, the collective memory, to make sure somebody who goes through suffering and grief and experiences death in such cruel ways, is still loved by God, is not abandoned by God. And so how do I get there? Because yes, we have cultural diversity, but there is a very strong religious core teaching when it comes to death and grieving and dying, and very strong norms that help me supporting in my work and in supporting the dying and the grieving. And I always tap into that resource because religious discourse is powerful in the Muslim community. The religious language empowers people. It gives them comfort and strength. And when we can tap into that, of course, it's for us important as a resource.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Thank you so much, Zeyneb. That's going to be our last question. I really invite all of us to take the time that we've spent and the reminder that Zeyneb gave about how this thought process and engaging in discussion and dialogue about death and dying is really an invitation to invest in our life and invest in how we spend our time and our energy, our gifts and our talents, and to consider and reconsider our lifestyles and the way that we live. Zeyneb, we thank you so deeply for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. We have been enriched. We have spent this hour or so very well with one another. There is going to be more announcements. There are going to be other webinars from INELDA. Please look in your inboxes. Please stay tuned for all of the other information that's going to be coming our way. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was our honor and our pleasure to host you and to have you. Zeyneb, a warm thank you to you again. And good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Nzinga, for being my partner.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for all the work. May God bless you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful.
Same here, same here. You're an invaluable resource for us. For those of you who have not had a chance, please take the time. It is very, very well worth it. Zeyneb's series, the 3 parts, they're long. They do take time to go through, but it is a legit course, each one an individual class that dives into first theology and then the life of the prophet and his experience with grief, and then how it plays out in our modern and American life in this world. That's very, very relevant. So there are some questions that you still had. That's going to be a great way to get some of your questions answered. And please send them forward. We'll do our best to still answer any questions that are lingering for folks. So thanks again, and please have a good night.
Thank you,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Stay blessed.